Richardson, civil rights attorney at McCune Law Group, getting into it once again, breaking it down, the law and common sense.
Joe, I'm going to begin with you because we are already getting probably the biggest question everybody has at this point is, when are we going to get a verdict? More specifically, let me ask you, what would you consider a long deliberation in this case?
I would consider a long deliberation more than 3 or 4 days. I think they have some things to consider. There's 5 charges. There's 34 witnesses by the prosecution, even though the defense didn't do any. And they just got some evidence admitted. So I'd say if you're going past a few days, it's a long verdict. And you've got the holiday factor too. There's an open question as to whether or not these guys are going to go past Thursday under any circumstance because they don't want to come back after a holiday. It is just an inclination that juries sometimes do, and we'll see what they do. Can they get it done in a few days? Yeah, they could. But if it goes longer, particularly past the holiday, I would be surprised.
Joe, so early today, right out of the gate, they're going to go over jury instructions. That's expected to take as long as 2 hours. What can we expect? What type of instructions does the jury get to understand what their job is once these deliberations begin?
So there are always general instructions, a series of general instructions having to do with their obligations as a jury, including, but not limited to, things related to evidence as a general standpoint. Here's how you're supposed to weigh evidence. Here's where common sense weighs in. I'm not quoting, from exact jury instructions, but they do cover what their conduct is supposed to be as jurors, how they're supposed to weigh evidence, and then the specific causes of action themselves. Okay, as it pertains to racketeering, this is what needs to be shown. And then there's some supplemental instructions or some instructions that go into a bit more detail about each of the causes of action. So there'll be general instructions about their conduct, the things that they're supposed to do, and how to weigh evidence, as well as things that are specific to the causes of action themselves.
Joe, I know you're a regular on Law and Crime. Kelly Bees 6578 says, "Oh, it's Joe again. Hi, Joe. I think he lives there." So it's good to know that you've been on this for a long time. We've seen lunch breaks, as you typically do during trial. A question coming in from Jesse Davin is, will the jury typically work through lunch once they get deliberations? What does their day look like once this goes to the jury?
Typically, their day is going to look similar to the time that they were normally in court hearing evidence. That's when they're going to be in deliberations. They will have lunch breaks. They will break for now. I don't know if they are going to be going after dinner or any of that kind of stuff, but typically their day from an hour standpoint, particularly in terms of breaks, including breaks, ought to look pretty similar than what they did while they were hearing testimony.
Yeah, Joe, I'll turn that to you because I'm just looking at a list of the jurors and what we know about them. For as much as I'm 37, grew up with Sean Combs, you have people, a female, she's a treatment coordinator. She's 74 years old. Somebody who worked in finance, he's 68. Another one, 67, 68. So it's not necessarily everybody grew up in the P. Diddy generation and was consuming his music, especially in the late 90s, the early 2000s, and then all the TV shows he did. Joe, in cases like this where you have celebrity, how much of an impact can someone like Sean Combs have on the jury just because of who he is?
He can have a huge impact. Everybody knows who Diddy is, even if you don't consume his music, even if you don't drink his alcohol. He was a high society guy. The guy got the key to the city in New York City. And most rap stars don't have that, okay? Most business owners don't have that. And so he's the type of person that at least you've heard of, you've heard about. However one feels about it, depending on how close they are, they might follow along with an opinion. Those of us that followed East Coast, West Coast, rap and all these other things might have more of an opinion on P. Diddy one way or the other. But everybody knows that he's in the universe. And so the question becomes, hopefully the jury is objective about evaluating evidence and things like that. But there's always this potential problem for jury nullification, where if for their own righteous indignation, I think there's some people that really love Diddy on the street still. He's not doing so well with the government nowadays, but I think that there's some people on the street that love Diddy. And is there a possibility that they could actually ignore the evidence on some level and find him not guilty anyway? There could be jury nullification, and it's more likely to happen, even though it's not likely to happen statistically. It's more likely to happen with somebody like this.
Jury's hands. Joe, I have a question for you. This is from Coco Chanel 353. How will it proceed with the Tony Busby suits? Will Diddy have to go to court again for every single lawsuit?
Once something is filed in civil court, statistically speaking, 90% of them never make it to trial. And that's for one reason or another, either because they settle, which typically is favorable or at least something that's satisfactory to a plaintiff, or because the defendant was able to get rid of the case with an early dispositive motion. Dispositive, the case, the key word in that being disposed, like a motion for summary judgment. I don't know how much that's going to happen here because he basically, most of these guys, including Mr. Busby, have lawsuits that allege fact issues. So the question is whether it's more likely than not that these things actually occurred, creating the cause of action that in turn creates the cause for recovery. But that being said, there's 80 of them. And I don't know what allows one or other to stick out more than the others to bring them to the front of the line, so to speak. The second they filed these cases, they probably ensured that they would be in litigation for 2 to 3 years. And so nothing's going to happen right away, particularly if Diddy is dealing with appeals, dealing with things related to the criminal case. And there's a question is, you're going to try to outlast these guys, see how much they have in the way of resources, seeing whose cases actually make the most sense to potentially resolve and to get off their plate. And so there are so many going on right now. Nothing may happen right away.
And Joe, staying on the kind of the conversation we're having related to the civil suits, this is a question from Jesse Davin. Can the jurors use the civil suits / settlements as evidence of wrongdoing, or does the jury give those as much weight as the jury, deem necessary?
This particular jury should not be considering the civil suits at all. They shouldn't be considering anything that's admitted, particularly because, among other things, not only should it be admissible, not only should it be discussed coming in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, other than Cassie, the people that are on the stand that may have had civil suits, and then that shows up in cross. But other than that, there's still the matter of them having different standards of proof. I can be wrong on a civil suit, which is just more likely than not, which is just this careful balancing here, where it's more likely than not that something happened. But that doesn't mean that I'm convicted beyond a reasonable doubt. So the jury should only consider the civil suits that came before them in cross-examination as it pertains to Cassie, for instance, and things like that, to the extent that it may bear on the credibility of the witness. Other than that, they shouldn't be thinking, oh, no, he got sued in civil suits, so he's more likely guilty in the matter at hand in the criminal case. They shouldn't be considering that at all.
Joe, just from a couple of the lines that we've been speaking about in between some of the questions from our chat, what do you make of how the judge is going about instructing this jury about what their job is going to be when they begin deliberations?
He's doing what he's supposed to do in terms of letting them know, separate the wheat from the chaff. He was indicted. You have to make a decision based on the evidence. You can decide you heard someone testify for days or hours or whatever else, and you don't believe it. You can throw out the baby with the bathwater. You can figure out what you believe versus what you don't believe. He's really letting the jury know the parameters of what it is that they're supposed to decide, because theoretically what's supposed to happen is they go into the deliberation room and then they start applying those rules while they're looking at the evidence. Now they'll have opportunity to ask questions and things like that to get further clarification. But the judge is doing exactly what he's going to do, starting off by letting them know what their obligations actually are, how they're supposed to weigh evidence, what they're supposed to consider, what they're not supposed to consider, and going from there.
Joe, another question coming in. This also kind of touches on the civil suits, dozens of them that Sean Combs is facing, whether or not he's innocent or guilty in this trial. Question from Gobiko Studio: would a guilty verdict affect those suits in that the Combs team would be quicker to settle, or the opposite for that matter?
To my mind, I don't know how much it would affect, because if he's convicted on the criminal side of things, he's got bigger fish to fry than what may happen with these civil cases, because on other things, depending on what he's convicted of, he might be facing asset seizure. And so he's going to have bigger fish to fry if he's convicted. Now, that being said, does it come a little bit further to the forefront on his plate if he actually gets off? Yeah, I think that it does, because he's probably emboldened in terms of dealing with those. But I think that one of the things that he can take advantage of, frankly, the second somebody files a lawsuit, you're looking at 1 year to 3 years until it gets all the way to the finish line. So he can actually take his time, spread his game out, for lack of a better term, and figure out which ones, from a priority standpoint, are the ones to deal with, which ones are the ones to get rid of, or does he just decide to hang out on each and every one of them and hold out? It's a lot harder to do that with 80 cases than if you have 2 or 3 or 4 or 10. But my sense is, of course, it's the criminal case first, and then what's happening with that is really going to dictate the speed and the vigor with which he deals with everything else.
These are pictures from the AP of what the jury room looks like. There are a few times that a room so bland, a picture like this, so boring, is actually super compelling to look at, because this is where the fate of Sean Combs is going to be decided. I want to bring Joe in on this point. Take us into what happens in the jury room. We know they're going to decide, we know they're going to go through evidence, but specifically, what is going to take place in that room?
Well, it could go a lot of different ways, but my sense is that they're going to pick someone that's going to be the foreperson, and they're going to probably, that foreperson, if they're objective, they're going to say, well, we could maybe approach this a couple different ways. Maybe we should start off based on the charges, figuring out where everyone is. Or maybe we should start having general discussions about what people's thoughts are and let that lead us into the causes of action. So it can be done. There's more than one way to skin a cat. It can be done several different ways. But what I'm really particularly interested in is who emerges as an advocate one way or the other, right? Who emerges as someone that says, guys, there's reasonable doubt here everywhere. We all know that he's a bad guy, but does this make him, the criminal enterprise thing has always been a square peg in a round hole for me. Who are going to be the sides? Who are going to be the folks? And is it a situation where it's going to be very, very close to being guilty or very, very close to being not guilty? And then you just have a couple people or less to actually convince, right? So hopefully somebody comes in an organized fashion and says, here's the way we can do this without anyone feeling negative or feeling attacked, etc. Because we need to have a conversation, because we're all doing our jury service. Give people the opportunity to speak, to say what needs to be said, and then hopefully they can go charge by charge, so that by the time they're done, they can say that it was thorough and they got where they needed to be, and that they served the people the best way they can in their obligation as jurors.
Joe, I want to turn to you, and then I'll turn to Dr. Hendricks. First off, it's kind of the big question that, we can talk about all the specifics. How do you see this ending?
Yeah, boy, I tell you, I should put a patent on that and sell it. But my sense is, if the jury is able to decipher, separate the wheat from the chaff, and they're objective, I think that he gets convicted on at least prostitution, transportation with intent for prostitution. I think that the racketeering is harder. You need a meeting of the minds. And it's not clear that there's a meeting of the minds, because I have an open question that the jury may have. Who's the co-conspirator? KK is said to be the co-conspirator, but nobody put her on the stand. And I think the fact that she's not on the stand, I think that works to the detriment of the prosecution more than anything, because the jury may be asking, why is this person that everybody's talking about not put on the stand? Then I think the trafficking is somewhere in between. There's an argument that Cassie's trafficking of Cassie is a little bit more clear, and maybe that can be shown. I think the force and the threat and the coercion could come from the $20,000 demand that her mother ended up paying. Not so clear as it pertains to the other. So we'll see what ultimately happens with it. I'll be here with my popcorn, but my sense is more of a conviction as it pertains to the lowest charge, with sex trafficking somewhere in between. And I think that RICO, racketeering is going to be a little bit more difficult.